The Human Shield, written by Khajiit Like to Sneak, read by Daniel Million. Brevik blinked as he looked at the strange alien on the screen in his office. As the elected governor of Rias 3, it was his job to handle any first contact situations that came through his system. Eventually, relationships with first contacts would be normalized through diplomats, but the initial contact was his to deal with, along with all the associated headaches that came with it. Reaching under his desk, he pressed 2 buttons, activating the screen in his office. Grickno Lee Nakin of the Eternal Empire. Greetings from Rias 3. I would like to clarify a few things from your initial broadcast before we go any further, Brevik said as he reached up and brushed his antennae back in annoyance, not that the alien he was dealing with would have any clue to its significance. Am I to understand that you are demanding our complete surrender and subjugation as slaves to your fleet, or you will commence with the orbital bombardment of a garden world? Yes, the furred alien said, baring its pointed teeth in a broad grin. Brevik could only assume that it meant as much the same as it did among other social predators that made up the Union's member species. All not of the Empire are unworthy of the Empire. You will be enslaved to work for the glory of the Empire, be it as laborers or as prey to sharpen our claws upon. Brevik nodded in understanding. That this invader was declaring the planet and its people would be enslaved to the invading fleet told Brevik much about his species. Most likely they evolved from pack hunters. What the pack claimed was the property of the pack. Even when united by a more powerful pack that enforced a broader hierarchy upon them, it still came down to what the pack could hold for itself. I see, he said after a moment. You haven't been a spacefaring species for long, have you? He asked calmly. We have roamed the stars for 100 standard stellar cycles, and have proven our superiority to all we have met in that time, Grickno Lee Nakin bragged proudly. Yours shall be the 3rd race we bring to heel under our empire. Brevik had to keep his emotions in check as the universal translator gave him the time frame of their stellar involvement in Union standard measurement. 100 standard stellar cycles was nothing to be ashamed of. The newest members of the Union had only been FTL capable for 23 years. But 100 standard stellar cycles was a pittance compared to the eldest species of the Union. They had been amongst the stars for more than 10,000 stellar cycles. This eternal empire was a mere child compared to the galactic average. I see. Allow me to give you a primer on the political climate then. When Grickno Lee Nakin, and God's Brevik found that bit of a tongue twister to be both pompous and annoying, began to object, Brevik raised one hand up to forestall him. As your newest slave, I feel it would be remiss of myself if I did not ensure you were fully informed as to what you might expect now that you have reached this sector of the galaxy. Grickno Lee Nakin paused, then nodded, motioning with his hand in a manner that Brevik took to mean he should hurry up. Good. They're subject to flattery and arrogance, as any bully is, Brevik noted. You may have noticed that we have no defensive fleet, only a few patrol craft that are armed with significantly lighter weapons than your ships currently are bearing. Have you asked yourself why that is? Grickno, Brevik couldn't be bothered to even think his full name any longer, gave out a short bark that didn't need any interpretation to understand. There was no need to. You are a weak prey species, content to fatten yourselves upon grass and roots. You have no concept of battle, or what it means to be a predator among the Havro Mistal. Brevik couldn't help the chuckle that slipped out at this point. Whatever Grickno was referencing, its meaning was clear. Every species had the equivalent. A slow, dumb animal that would stand there while another chewed on its leg without giving a single complaint. That the alien thought so little of the Rias system, or the species that made the colony world their home, was amusing considering their history. No, you will find we are well acquainted with combat. Herbivores we may be, but even we have fought amongst ourselves. In fact, if you had been in this part of space a few millennia ago, you would have been privy to one of the largest, most multi-sided wars that ever was fought in the void. Near 100 species, dozens of coalitions and alliances that shifted so often that allies would turn to enemies in the middle of a battle. The war had gone on like that for centuries, at least. Entire societies bent on the destruction of their neighbors. It had gone on for so long that none even remembered why the war was even fought. Then where are your warships? Grickno demanded. That he believed he was calling a bluff was obvious upon his alien features.
Where are your warriors, your leaders of war? They are not here because you have none.
Brevik nodded in agreement. You are correct. We have none.
Because you are cowards that hide behind lies and deceptions,
Grickno declared in triumph.
All of your kind will be under our boot and learn your places at the lash.
No, Brevik declared as he let a smile creep onto his face as he glanced at the lower right corner of his screen. You misunderstand. We have no fleets, for we have no need of them. The Great War I mentioned, it ended and a time of peace swept across the void. You see, our great and glorious war drew the attention of a new species. They had already spread among several planets before they met any other FTL-capable species involved in the war. When they did finally meet, it was due to a pacification fleet making an error in navigation. The pacification fleet ended up in the orbit of the new species' homeworld and did just as you are threatening to do now. They glassed the planet with orbital bombardment. Brevik took a moment to pause, drawing in a breath as he remembered the footage taken of that time. It was ancient history now, but it was taught in all education systems in the Union, not as a threat, but as a reminder of how low they could go. The species that would eventually go on to found the Union had devolved into barbarism, pure and simple. Then that pacification fleet ended up in a backwater system and glassed a garden world. Not just any garden world, but that of a completely uncontacted species. It changed history in a way no one could have predicted, and even now, thousands of years later, no one thought it anything but a horrendous act that brought with it wondrous change. The species whose home planet had been all but destroyed did not take kindly to suddenly being the target of aggression from an unknown species. They reacted, and they reacted swiftly. In the space of fewer than 2 decades, they defeated every single species that partook in the war. They did not conquer us, however. They did not enslave us, and obviously they did not destroy us. Instead, when the dust had settled and they stood before all the species that would go on to form the Union, they reached out to us. They helped us to rebuild. They taught us things we had forgotten for so long that we had even forgotten that we had ever known them. They helped us to rebuild our broken colonies, find lost homeworlds, to repair the environments decimated by orbital strikes or ground combat so fierce it had disrupted the biosphere. They helped to retool our industry from an unsustainable and damaging wartime one into clean and sustainable peacetime structures that would turn the universe from one of have-nots and have-fewer into a true post-scarcity society. They treated us with such kindness in our defeat and fought with such viciousness in war that when the Union was formed, theirs was the only species allowed to still field warships. The bridge of Grickno's ship suddenly became a hive of activity. Brevik could hear Grickno's bridge officer calling out alerts all around him. The hostile little alien's own eyes were widening by the second as a fleet of ships outnumbering the invaders 3-1 entered the system. If numbers were not enough to frighten, Brevik knew the incoming ships were nearly 3 times the size, and even the smallest was more heavily armed than the entire invading fleet. Grickno, I can call you Grickno, can't I? Brevik asked in a voice laced with such mocking sincerity that even the most emotionally dull-witted of the Union would understand it was anything but. I'd like to introduce you to the military arm of the Union. They call themselves the United Stellar Navy. Some of the more fanatical of the Union call them the Saviors. My people, we call them Friend. We call them Humanity. The Human Shield, written by Khajiit Like to Sneak, read by Daniel Million.